We should be live.
We might be live. If we are live, let us know in the comments. This is Brandon Sanderson signing Words of Radiance, leather-bound tip-in pages, which will eventually... Well, these are signatures, not tip-in pages, but that's confusing. And minor distinction of publishing terminology. For the Kickstarter next year. Working my way through the 50,000. Have no idea how far I am at this point. Hopefully, we've made a significant dent.
We should maybe see if we can figure out how far along we are. That would be a nice number to know. Mm-hmm. Get one of those thermostat measuring things, throw it on the website. That would be funny.
I am your author for the evening, and we are doing something a little different this time. We are doing a Reddit AMA. r/books. They have compiled questions from Redditors, and that's where we're going to be answering the questions, and these answers will be transcribed and posted to Reddit.
Yep, as soon as we can.
As soon as our transcriptionist gets them. It should be going while we're doing it, right? I assume they're watching, and they will live transcribe my answers.
Thank you, Benjamin.
Mm-hmm. And then post them. They'll send them to us, and one of our team will post them under my name. So when you're seeing the post happening on Reddit, it is actually Kellen or somebody?
It's going to be Michael.
It's Michael.
Yep.
Michael will be posting as me.
Yeah, Kellen's working from home today, so she didn't get the fun job.
He'll be playing the role of Brandon. That's how we're going to run it this time. It is a non-spoiler stream, and I've just told Adam, if a question is super spoilery, just don't ask it. If the answer would be spoilery, I'll make the call. Because there's some I can talk around without giving too many spoilers or things like that. But we're going to try to avoid spoilers for anything. AMAs are fun, but time-consuming. I was r/Fantasy's first AMA ever, I believe, way back when. An excellent subreddit with solid moderation and a good community. This is r/books. I've done at least one for them in the past, I believe. And usually it's me sitting with a laptop, spending all day answering questions. And these days, I need to be double using my time when I can. So we have set up this convoluted method of getting the answers to Reddit. Hopefully those on Reddit enjoy this method of getting them. I know this is what they do with like the movie stars sometimes. Like I remember reading Morgan Freeman's AMA, and there was someone I think from Reddit there typing out his answers for him and posting them, so he could just talk it through. So, me and Morgan Freeman.
Yes. I just want you to know, while Kellen is at home, she is making peanut butter bars. Oh. Very rudely.
Very rudely.
We expect those at the office tomorrow.
Are there
Kellen.
enough for everyone in the stream, Kellen? So, Adam's going to throw questions at me. Are we going to take any questions from the chat or anything?
I mean, it will have to be a really good question. I'm really trying to keep these from the r/books subreddit since it's their AMA. But if there's one that I happen to see, which I'm not going to be looking too closely for things today, I may throw it out.
Okay, awesome. Well, here we go.
Well, here's a name that we've never heard before. Joffwa.
Joffwa. Hello, Joffwa.
He says, you've teased that we might get movie or television news before too long.
Yes.
With so much of the Cosmere left to right, are you concerned about movies and shows catching up to you? Would you make them hold off on a Stormlight Archive show until you finish, or are you comfortable letting adaptations get ahead of you?
It depends on how comfortable I get. By the way, good question, Joffwa. With the television and movie format. When Stormlight happens as a television show, I want to be deeply involved. I want to be writing some of the episodes. I want to be a co-creator. I want to be very, very, very involved, shall we say. And I don't have the skill set for that yet. That's why I'm planning to make some other things first, and then basically get some great masterclass lessons on this sort of thing. And even when we make it Stormlight, I don't intend to be the showrunner. I might be co-showrunner with someone else. So if that is the place where we are, and I am running this show, and I am doing that much for it, getting ahead of me is not that big of a deal. Otherwise, I think that I would resist letting people get ahead of me. Now, this is kind of well balanced with the way I'm creating the Cosmere, however. Because we're doing different parts and eras, like we aren't calling the first 5 Stormlight books Era 1, but there is a 10-year-ish time jump between book 5 and book 6. So if I were to sell Stormlight, I would probably say you have rights to the first 5 right now. And then the first 5 will be finished fairly soon here. And then we will see how things go with the back 5 and do a television show. If I did an expansion, we'd see how far along I am, or if we take a break or something like that. So, Joffua, I am worried about this. It is something on my radar.
Longshot_97 says, which magic system as an author are you most proud of, and which is your best work?
Which is my best work? Which is magic system am I most proud of? So I think that I am most proud of still the Allomancy, Feruchemy, Hemalurgy magic system. This is partially because it was early in my career where I really needed a hit, and it really worked for me. It meshed with my talents very well, and it let me tell the story the way that I wanted to tell it. It worked very well for that. It allowed me to have 3 different mini magic systems across the trilogy that interconnected in an interesting way. And particularly for that stage in my career, it's exactly what I needed, and I am so glad that I was able to put it together and have it work. And even still, it is so much fun to write in that magic system. Doing Era 2 has let me still play with that same magic, and it has not gotten boring to me. There's enough nuance to the various types of powers and things that I can still play with it and tweak it and do interesting things with it. And so I'm most proud of that. Which is my best work? Magic system-wise or just writing-wise? I'm going to take this one as writing-wise. What, in my opinion, is my best work? It's so hard to say as the author. I think people who are not me get to choose what my best work is. But I have only won 1 Hugo Award for fiction, and it was for Emperor's Soul. That seems to indicate that it is among my better works. I generally consider the Stormlight Archive my best work. And I often say that it is my best writing, but it also is the one that takes the most trust to get into. So it's not always the best place to start. I do think some of the secret projects I have expanded my skill set in interesting ways. I don't know if that will make them my best works. Time will have to tell. But I am proud of the expansion of my skill set they represent.
Radis says, how do you feel about the fact that queer people are treated better in your novels than on the campus you teach at? And with a follow-up question, how do you reconcile donating to a church that promotes purity culture, homophobia, and anti-Semitism with writing books for the general public?
That is an interesting question. 2 different questions there. Let's tackle them separately. By the way, thank you for a bold but not insulting phrasing of that question. So the church's general perspective on LGBTQ people is not where I, as a liberal member of the church, would necessarily want it to be. That said, I have faith in the church. I have had spiritual experiences confirming to me that this is where God wants me and that God is real. There is a scripture in the Book of Mormon where a person is asked a question that they cannot answer, and they just say, I don't know the meaning of all things, but I know God loves his children. I take that perspective. And if you look through my own history with LGBTQ people, I needed some education, as many of us did, on some of these issues. It is a process by which we learn from listening, and we get better and hopefully become better people. Better people as a culture, better people as individuals. My belief is that the answer to wanting there to be change is to not ostracize in most cases. And this is different from the way that a lot of people perceive it. And it's possible that their perceptions might be right and I might be wrong. Time will tell. But my belief is that by being a more liberal member of the church and staying in the church and continuing at BYU, this is a way to get to where we want to be. That if everyone who is a little bit more left on these issues than the institution is leaves the institution, then that's not going to help the institution. That I can do more good in this regard by listening, figuring things out, becoming the best person I can. And it is difficult to sometimes navigate these things. I think that's part of what life is about. Again, to use a religious metaphor, in our doctrine, God gave two contradictory commandments to Adam and Eve and said, figure it out. Mm-hmm. And I think that with the perspective of spirituality, this life is about figuring out difficult questions. And that's a difficult question. And I don't know that I have the answers, but the place I've arrived at right now is I want to be better. I want to listen better. I've been actively trying to do so. And I think that by continuing to teach at BYU, by continuing to do my best to represent LGBTQ people accurately and lovingly and respectfully in my work, that I will do the most good. Along the second question, I don't understand the anti-Semitism part of it.
They did provide an example if you want it.
This might be too much nuance for an AMA, right? Like this is going to be a big answer. Mm-hmm. Maybe we need to chop this up. But I'm happy to hear what their example is.
The example was specifically from a few years ago when the church was baptizing Holocaust victims.
So the church agreed. Mm-hmm. So that is an example of the church making a mistake. And they admitted that mistake and said, we're not going to do this anymore. It was insensitive, and the church... I thought it was insensitive. The church thought it was insensitive. I think Christianity in general has this line to walk with being respectful of the Jewish people from which our religion came without being anti-Semitic. And that is another difficult line to walk, but it's also one that we absolutely should be called on when we make mistakes. And the church made a mistake. And rectified that mistake. You can no longer do that. And so it does kind of also, our doctrine, there's some misunderstandings in what that means. So in our church, we believe that everybody needs to be baptized. Christ said everybody needs to be baptized to get to heaven. We're like, how do people who are dead do that? And so we have a doctrine that says you can be a proxy baptism for an ancestor, and then they get to choose whether that has any effect or not. They don't actually, it doesn't join them into the church. It just says, look, I'm thinking of you. If you want this, it's here for you. It was insensitive to just go do that for Holocaust victims, but from the perspective of the church members, it was trying to be loving. It was trying to do something good, and the church recognized that and backed off on it. You can still be baptized by proxy for someone who is Jewish if that's your actual ancestry. And that is up for them in the afterlife to decide if that's something that they want. Anytime, this is one of the things that, the church, we have a structure. We have a leadership. The church makes decisions, and each time it does, it puts itself out there. And there is a certain amount of respect I give them for that, because in a lot of the Christian world, there is no centralization. There is no, if you say, but this thinker said this, and they're like, well, they're not part of my religious framework. They were that other sect of Christianity. It's very easy to get around these things. The church is hierarchical. We do have an actual leadership, and so it is going to lead to us making mistakes, being called out on them, learning. We believe in the church that we are not infallible, that though God leads the church, the people are fallible, and we will make mistakes. And I hope that we are always willing to cop to them and do better. So that's a long answer. Like I said, AMAs are a better method for nuanced discussion than perhaps Twitter or something like that, but they aren't the absolute best, so I apologize if I glossed over the question in any way. It wasn't my intention.
If this was on Twitter, that would have been like 400 tweets.
Yes, that would have been about 400 tweets. So,
Bend1310 says, what's a question you've always wanted to answer but never had the chance?
Here's the thing. I get this question a lot. In fact, it's a go-to question that journalists ask. Smart question to ask. Is there something I didn't ask you that I should have asked you? I like that they do that because the interviewee may have been sitting there the whole time being like, I want to say this. I want to get this out there. But then there's not an opportunity. And so it's an excellent question to be asking. It's an excellent question of you to have asked. It's thinking of me, which I appreciate. However, I always have trouble with this question because I have answered so many questions and I am kind of outspoken and I have my channels and my mediums to say what I want to say that I don't ever feel like there are things I'm not being asked. Now, I enjoy nerding out over video games and pop culture as much or more sometimes than I enjoy talking about my own work, because it always feels when I'm talking about my own work just a little bit, I don't know, prideful's the wrong term. I'm here to talk about my work. But it's fun to talk about how great other people's stuff is. Mm-hmm. That's more fun to me. And so whenever I get questions about my favorite video games or movies, I always am like, woo, I get to talk about, Dark Souls now. Let me tell you how cool Dark Souls is. But I have an outlet on my YouTube channel, and my YouTube channel, thank you guys, you were very long-suffering putting up with Elden Ring content, which I know is not why you came to my channel, but you were very good to let me nerd out over video games. So I don't mind questions about video games. How about that as the short answer? Too long, didn't read. More questions about video games.
The Ninth Saboteur says, dude, you rock. That's all.
Well, you rock too. And thank you for saying that.
Victor Romeo says, some very successful authors have difficulty in delivering books to wrap up the series. Why do you think this happens, and what is the best attitude and healthy behaviors diehard fans should use to encourage authors to deliver the books they are hanging out for?
Wow. Anytime you get into should, that's dangerous ground, because I am a creator, and I don't think that I should be dictating fan behavior, right? Like, that's your world as a community to decide upon. And I prefer to let the community decide that. But there's two questions here. Let's back up to the first one. Why do so many creators have trouble delivering? I think that there is no one answer. I know many of these creators, and the reasons vary as much as human beings vary. One consistent reason tends to be it's been a hard decade for a lot of people. And there are often there are difficult things about this last decade that have been emotionally draining for a lot of people. And then you add on top of that personal issues, and suddenly it's just very hard to be creative in the way that writing books requires creativity. Another reason is a lot of writers tend to be what we call discovery writers. And discovery writers, Stephen King is kind of the quintessential example. George Martin talks about himself this way. He calls himself a gardener. And gardeners, their biggest strength tends to lie in character interactions and in believability in these characters, because they give the characters so much volition. A discovery writer doesn't know what their ending is. They just start writing and let the characters interact. And their strength tends to be in those interactions, and their weakness tends to be in endings, because they don't know where they're going. It's harder to build toward it. That's not to say that discovery writers can't write great endings. Lots of discovery writers write fantastic endings. Just usually means lots more revision afterward to build toward that ending. But some of the discovery writers that I know personally, endings are very daunting. And they know it's going to be a mess. and they don't want it to be a mess. And so it slows them down the closer they get to the ending as they try to be like, how can I make this one not a mess? But it is just kind of a natural thing out of an outgrowth of writing style. So those are two answers. How should fans encourage? Again, the should is very difficult for me here. I think that all of the various fan reactions are understandable, and in some ways, they are necessary to that fandom's own psychology. I don't, for instance, visit I know they exist, the places that exist to complain about me, right? To complain about my writing style, to complain about the tropes that I prefer, to complain about all of those things. But those places existing is healthy for that audience, right? It can become toxic, but the existence of them is not toxic unto itself. And I think it is healthy to have a place to go talk with people who have tastes similar to yours, and even to post some memes about, just to have some lulz. That's healthy. That's good. It can become unhealthy when it turns into harassing behavior. One of the things I don't like is when the way our society treats people who love something. If you genuinely love something and speak about it online, someone is going to try to steal that love from you and crush it. Whatever it is that you love. I don't like that. I do like interesting discussions between people who disagree on things. I disagree wildly with Peter, my editorial director, over Into the Spider-Verse, which he just could not stand and is one of my favorite movies ever. It was the frame rate of the animation just drove him up the wall. I enjoy having a conversation about why we dislike this. But if I'm just sitting with people talking about my love for this, what I don't want is someone to stroll in and say, that's the worst film ever. And the internet has a big problem with that. And it also becomes toxic when it gets harassing toward the creator. And I don't know where these lines exactly are. But I would recommend, if you want to know, my answer is you can find the answers very easily to these. These books are not out yet. The authors want to have them out. They have said they want to have them out, and they are trying to work on them. There's not much more you can do as a fandom. And so at that point, you just have to accept that answer. And no amount of going to the author and demanding is going to speed it up. It's probably going to slow it down. In fact, I would bet it slowed down most of these books quite a bit. Boy, transcriptionist, was it Benjamin?
Benjamin, yeah.
Benjamin, I'm sorry. You're going to have to make, And Michael, you'll probably have to split these into multiple posts sometimes. I don't know what Reddit's word count is.
I think you can do quite a bit on Reddit.
Yeah, okay. Well,
we'll find out.
We'll find out.
He's still working on the
first one?
LGBTQ.
Oh,
okay, yeah, okay. I went on for a while on that one. So
great answer, though. Okay, Verandus3 says, which of your worlds would you most and least want to live in?
So most right now is, so whenever I get this question, I say, can I go write quickly a short story in a really nice world where nothing is wrong, they have the internet, and authors can make a professional living as a novelist?
And ramen.
And they have instant ramen. Can I do that? I'll go quickly write one up and go live there. Because I don't really want to live in any of the worlds. I like air conditioning, right? Air conditioning isn't a thing in basically any of the Cosmere worlds. You can make it work with various magic systems, but in most cases, to make it work with those various magic systems, you're going to have to be pretty high up in the social structure because, most of these worlds have not gotten equality and things down even to the level that we have. We have our own problems, but these worlds are not necessarily great places to live. And then beyond that is generally there is some world ending / city ending / disaster coming. Boy, that sentence didn't make sense. Benjamin's going to have some world ending event and or disaster coming that I wouldn't want to be around for. if I have to pick, I usually say Scadrial because they are closest to the tech level I want. But they are also the most commonly subject to world-ending things because there's going to be 4 series, at least, in the Mistborn world. So maybe Nalthis would be better because the fewer books I write about a place, probably the better, the less likely the world is to end anytime soon. It is definitely not Threnody. We'll just say that.
My Wooga says, in regards to the perpendicularities in the Cosmere, were you at all inspired by the pools in the wood between the worlds in C.S. Lewis's The Magician's Nephew?
So it's got to be back there in the back of my brain. But I so vaguely remember The Magician's Nephew that I didn't even remember these exist when you're saying that. So the answer is a solid maybe. It might be there in the back of my head. I would say that the pool specifically, I don't know. I mean, I wrote the pool into Elantris not even knowing what it did because the Cosmere had not been constructed at that point. I'm like, and then when I was building the Cosmere, I was writing Mistborn, I'm like, all right, I know I wanted to be some sort of portal. I actually did know that because I had put iconography in about it being a portal. I'm like, where does it leave? All right, I'm going to build out the whole Cosmere. I now know what these are. I had a pool like this in Aether of Night that I had as kind of a receptacle for a certain cosmological thing that, or what became a certain cosmological thing. I solidified that, but it's not like, the pool that I wrote into Elantris when I put it there. Like, Aether of Night was after Elantris. I just put it in there. It's a portal to something. I had not built the Cosmere yet. So it is the first book where I started to think about that sort of stuff. And basically, you have a Hoyt appearance, and that's it. That was intentional. Everything else was retrofitted onto Elantris.
Puzzled Barnacle 200 says, if you were to write Mistborn now as an experienced author rather than as your first published series, what differences would you have made to this story, world, or character?
A couple of things. I'll limit it to 3. There's 3 sort of regrets I have. Well, maybe we'll do 4. We'll see. Mistborn, the first book, I really wanted to write it about Vin and have a female protagonist, and I want to do a good job with that. It is something that my early unpublished books I had been worse at, and I had been actively trying to get better at. I think I would have filled out the cast with more women. I got tunnel vision, and then because all of the stories I was using as guides, which were Ocean's 11, The Sting, Sneakers, and things like that, had overwhelmingly male casts, I just defaulted to that. And that's where some of these biases come from, right? You default to it because everything you've seen done it does it one way, but then you perpetuate that same without even thinking about it. That's not to say that it is always wrong to have an all-male cast. Like, I would not change Bridge 4. Bridge 4 is a group of soldiers recruited to run bridges, right? Like, this is going to be guys. That's just how it's going to work, and I think that feels right to me. Now, I did bring women into Bridge 4 later, but the original incarnation of Bridge 4, I wouldn't change. The crew, however, when I was writing Mistborn, a theme to me was that the point of the metallic arts is that it no longer is the body strength that a man has relevant compared to the strength that allomancy lends. And so Vin can go toe-to-toe with anybody of any, it doesn't matter because you've got allomancy. With that theme being in place, there's no reason why the whole crew should have been men. In fact, it should have been the opposite to reinforce that theme. I did it by default rather than by conscious choice. If you do it by conscious choice, that's a different thing than defaulting. I think I did break Sanderson's first law in the ending of Mistborn. I'm not going to give spoilers, but you can read about that other places. It's actually where I learned Sanderson's first law was by making a mistake, by using unforeshadowed powers to solve problems at the end of the book. And it leads to the end of the book having some unsatisfying resolution in little bits here and there that I would change. What else would I change about Mistborn? I had 4 of these. And now I'm like, what are the other two? Because those are the ones I talk about a lot. I don't know if if the first half of Hero of Agents, with as much traveling that it does, really gets across the feel that I want, and I might have set more of that in Luthadel. Not the stuff with a certain characters in another city who ends up in a blindfold, not that character, but the other stuff. It just felt like, as to me, I'm like, I'm bored of this. Let's go somewhere else, where the story is kind of the story of that city in a lot of ways, and it feels out of place in retrospect. I could just have made what was happening in another city a fortress in the city and dealt with the city as a character. It's like the city not being there, it's like missing a big character. Not that books can't travel, but that's a theme for Mistborn. And I think that if when I hopefully make a film of Mistborn 3, I think there's a decent chance I would move all the action to the city. And so that's 3 of them. I can't remember what the 4th one I would change is, but I'm sure that it'll pop up at some time.
Adajuju says, do you do much scientific research prior to writing books? I love how grounded your magical mechanics are. I'm curious how that coked about behind the scenes with fantasy authors.
Looks like some, yeah. Not writing hard science fiction, but writing a version of hard fantasy. What I generally do is I dig in, I do scientific research, but I do basically layman's research. I don't dig in so deep. Like, I am reading articles and the occasional pop science book. I am not becoming an expert. At that point, I get to where I think I won't embarrass myself, and then I write the book and I find an expert and I say, where am I screwing up? Give me some help on this. Where do I need to change things? Where do I need a plausible magical explanation? Because there are structural things about the story that I still want to do. And I will do both of them. For instance, I wrote the speed bubbles, which I often use this example. Sorry if you've heard it before, but they would probably redshift the light, which causes all kinds of interesting problems. I didn't want to deal with that. It's another level of it's realistic, but it would cause all kinds of problems in narrative. And so I'm just like, we are going to come up with an imaginal explanation why it doesn't do this. But other things I'll say, oh, that's cool. I can incorporate that. I will do my best. And it also depends on if it has to do with the magic or not, right? Like in Skyward, when I was doing the G-forces, I wanted the G-forces to feel realistic. So I appreciate the help of the fighter pilots who came in and said, boy, you just messed this one up entirely. And I was able to fix it before the draft went public. And I'm sure there's still things I got wrong, but it feels much more accurate, and that was really important for that book. Kaladin's Field Medicine is another one. I want that to be accurate as I can get it, because even though it's a fantastical world, some of those real details are what ground you and let you as a reader accept the magical explanations to other things. So I would say I do less than a science fiction author, but more than your average fantasy author.
Chuckles Lord says, I once saw someone describe your process as, quote unquote, he writes like a fan fiction author and then does proper editing as an explanation of how you generate so much work. This made me wonder which of your works you would be most interested in fanfic of.
So, I don't mind fanfic. I am happy to have people writing fanfic. I don't generally read the fanfic. I can only think of one fanfic piece I've read, and it was by a friend. And so, yeah. What do I most want fanfic of? It's whatever you want to write, by definition, right? I want you to be happy and enjoying the world and imagining yourself in it. At the same time, I think that that description of how I write is probably a little inaccurate. Maybe I'm misunderstanding, but I would say that the secret to my success in that regard is treating the writing like a job and then fixing the stuff that doesn't work or that lacks artistry, because I have done that, right? Writing anyway when I don't want to is the secret to being consistent. But doing that leads to chapters that are bad that I have to throw away. And being aware that forcing yourself to write anyway, most of the time, actually, you write better when you do that. But once in a while, you write something just truly awful. You're not feeling it, and there's a reason. Being flexible and being willing to throw that out. But I would say that every author's success is partially tied to the fact that the writers I know who are really good are almost universally better rewriters than they are drafters. And when I made that realization and decided I need to become that person, I need to learn to revise like Dan revises, who's one of the best writers I know. That's when I realized, that's when I leveled up. And this is just kind of universal among writers, that they're, even the ones that are brilliant in first drafts, they are better revisers.
They have a bonus follow-up question. Ooh. If you were forced to play Elden Ring with neither Unga or Bunga, what style would you pick, and why is it a sorcery build?
But I've done sorcery builds too many times. I can't Unga Bunga, so no giant swords. So when I go to New Game Plus, I don't know how much I'll be able to play in New Game Plus. As you can probably tell, I'm not able to play Elden Ring that often. But I want to try the opposite build. I want to try a fast dex build using short-range weapons, so claws or knives, and see if I can train myself to play that way instead. Sorcery build would be a lot of fun. They might be the second most fun after hitting things with giant swords, because you can do so much in sorcery. The versatility is really cool. And I really love the spell sword stuff they have in this in Elden Ring. And so I would be very much tempted to do that, because I didn't ever do really true spell sword and summon the magical swords and hit people with those and things. So maybe I would do that. Maybe I'd give it a try. But I would probably try the short range dex build first.
MTA or MT Alpha Wolf says, big fan. Introduced to you from Wheel of Time, read Stormlight, and am now on Mistborn. Love your writing. My question is that, did you know today is the chapter for the last battle in the memeing every chapter of the Wheel of Time over at Wetlander Humor?
Ooh.
Literally, they have memed a chapter a day for the last 695 days, and today is the last big one.
The last one. Is this the last battle chapter? Is that what they said?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they should probably have more than one day for that chapter, but I understand theming. I was not aware of this. I think that is awesome. I am vaguely familiar with that site and think what I've seen from it is pretty fun. So hopefully they are having a fun time with that beast of a chapter I gave them.
G-Man Eagle says, if you could invite another author and to contribute to the Cosmere, who would it be, and who would be on your short list?
Excellent question. So, to write in the Cosmere, I would really pick someone I know very well. So Isaac is first on the list. Isaac Stewart, who is my creative director and longtime friend and did all the maps and a lot of the artwork from the Cosmere books, would be first on the list. He is a writer, and he knows the Cosmere almost as well as I do. And I know it almost as well as Karen does. And so Isaac would be a good choice. After that, you'd probably see me looking toward my friends. Some like Dan would probably be number 2 on the list, followed by people I know and I work with consistently. It would be a dream to have fantastic authors writing the Cosmere, but I think that I would need more of a basis for them to write in than I have right now. Meaning more expansion, more experience with what it's like for someone who is not me to write in the Cosmere, more guidelines on how to write a good Cosmere story, and things like that. It would be very hard, for instance, to go to someone like some of the great science fiction authors like Jane Yolen or Guy Gavriel Kay or Neil or some of these people and say, write a Cosmere story. You only have to read 15 novels to come to understand what it is you should be writing. That's a tough sell.
Longshot97 says, avoiding spoilers as much as possible. This question concerns Mistborn Era 2.
Yes.
Aluminum at this time is supremely rare and quite expensive, and Wax is seen lamenting his profound lack of aluminum, guns, and bullets fairly often.
Yes.
However, couldn't he fashion a poor man's aluminum of sorts by coating his guns and potentially bullets in a layer of iron, then ferrochemically charging it? You've noted that metal mines can still be pushed, but much less than uninvested metals.
Right.
So is there a reason he has not done that?
So the layer you would get by just that little coat would be so small that it'd have very little effect. Now, there's a pretty good argument for putting it into bullets. The problem there is, are the alloys that make good bullets going to work very well? Now, granted, aluminum doesn't make for great bullets either. So, but any aluminum alloy kind of gets the property of aluminum, where any iron alloy does not necessarily get the property of being able to allomantically or ferrochemically interact with it in the right way. And so, can you get there? It's an excellent question that I perhaps should explore. I like this idea, but it's harder than you make it out to be. It is a good idea, though. It's a pretty good idea. You'd make a good weaponsmith in the Era 2 era of Mistborn. It's a good question. Good job.
Grunulac says, do you feel that initiatives like Kickstarter are the only way that writers will be able to make money from writing? I mean, is it even a career to be a writer anymore?
Yes, it's a good question. Let's start off with my bias, right? I have survivorship bias. Is that what it's called? Survivorship bias. This is where someone who is successful is going to have trouble determining which things they did led to their success and which things they did were luck. The example I commonly use is if you didn't know that coin flips were luck-based in some hypothetical weird world, and you had people all flip coins until one of them managed to get heads, 10 times in a row. Going to that person and saying, what is your strategy? How did you get 10 in a row? Are we still?
I didn't push record before, so I'm just recording while I can.
Okay. We were live, but we didn't have recording.
Correct.
Yes. Okay. Adam just pushed a button on the camera. I'm like, that's bad.
Sorry for the interruption.
You would maybe go to that person who won the coin flips 10 times and be like, hey, what's your strategy? Sell me a book on how to be the best coin flipper. Right? Like, that's an absurd example, but I can't point to what in my life was luck and what was skill. I'm sure both were involved quite a bit. So I sit atop the very pinnacle of this field. And so I am going to be, in some ways, one of the worst people possible to answer this question: can you make a living realistically as an author? My perspective has been, however, talking to people who are more in the trenches in what we would call the mid-listers and things like that there are more people making a living as writers now than have ever made a living as writers in the history of the world. Dan likes to quote a statistic that I'm going to get wrong, but he said something like in 2012, more books were published that year than had been published collectively in the history of humankind. Because of the explosion of self-publishing. I don't know if that's true, but it's plausible enough that I believe it until proven otherwise. I do know that there are a lot more books being published and a lot more books being bought because it's easier to buy the books. So I do think it is a viable career path. I don't know how viable it is. I don't know what those statistics are. And let's talk about this, right? Like, if you look at one of my classes that I teach of around 15 students, usually I have one in that class go pro every year in some regard. What going pro is, though, varies. For a lot of people, it's publish a novel, and then that novel makes how much, right? What's considered a good living when you're an artist and things like that. But let's just assume that one person a year out of the 15 is able to make at least a half-time income off of their writing. That's still like not a good percentage of the top students I can find. It's a better percentage than the world would tell you. They'd say it's 1 in 1,000. Like, no, it's not 1 in 1,000, right? We get maybe 300 applications. We whittle that down to 15. If you're in that 15, it's 1 out of 15 on average. It's much better than you think. But if you went to law school and they said 1 out of 15 of you will be able to get a job after you graduate, or if you went into engineering classes, and they're like, yeah, there's enough work for 7% of you or whatever that are in these classes, you'd be like, maybe I should get a different career. Is it, 1 in 15 people obviously can't be writers. Those are 1 in 15 who are good enough to get into my class. But it is still a viable thing, even if you're not Brandon Sanderson. But those are the people you need to be talking to about it. My biggest worry is that with the consolidation behind Amazon for print media, and this is happening in basically everything, right? Entertainment is being consolidated. Everything's being consolidated. There are 4 or 5 tech companies that rule the internet. And in my specific field, having Amazon be so dominant is dangerous in ways that I am worried about for authors going forward. But as it stands right now, I think things are still pretty good. Your chances are probably better than they've ever been. They still aren't great, but they're better than they've ever been. Did that answer the question, you think, Adam?
I think so.
Yeah.
You Need N says, death, wizards, witches, or guards?
I'm gonna pick the easy answer and go guards. My actual answer is Moist. Those are my favorite books, but the single best Discworld book is Night Watch, I believe. I agree with the general consensus on that. And I do think that Vimes, followed very closely by Witches, makes for the most sympathetic and relatable character. That, Discworld is better than most comedies in that there are a lot of well-rounded characters, but there's a whole lot of caricatures as well by the nature of the type of storytelling. And while I laugh at Death I feel like doesn't get good until Susan is involved. Right? And I've never been able to, I like the Wizards, but I've always just fond of the Wizards. I don't ever love the Wizards, right? And so either Vimes or Tiffany Aching is where Discworld is the most, has the most sympathetic characters and the most well-rounded characters. And I'm going to go with Vimes just because I happen to love Vimes. And Night Watch is the best Discworld book in my opinion, though my favorites are still kind of the oddballs. It's Going Postal, The Truth, things like that. So,
do you wish they would have that Moist would have had another book, or are you happy that it stopped at 1?
What do you mean? He got 3.
Did he get 3?
He got 3.
Jeez, that's been
Yeah.
too little since I read it. So it was Going Postal. What else
Going
did he
Postal,
do?
Making Money. Making Money is just as good as Going Postal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Raising
It's been too
Steam
I do
is
remember that.
right when Terry was near the end. And Raising Steam is still a good book, but it is, I don't think, on the brilliance level of Going Postal or The Truth or Night Watch, in that real sweet spot of Discworld when Pratchett was at the very top of his game.
I think I just became victim to the fact that I read all of the books in order, start to end, and just decided to have a stroke.
Yeah, that's okay. There's a lot of Discworld to keep straight, and he numbers them in a way that is not conducive to these conversations. So.
Someone in the chat, I will say, they want to know if Guards is a good starting point.
Guards is an excellent starting point, and generally it is top of the recommended starting points. I often say The Truth is also a great one, and of course the Tiffany Aching books are also a good entry point, but Guards tends to be the community consensus as best as one of these we can have one. Do not start with, and this is strong community consensus. Do not start at the beginning. Color of Magic is just, it is perhaps the weakest Discworld book, and it's first. And so don't start there.
I think that is sound advice.
Yeah.
Mistborn Elland says, which author or authors had influence over how you tell stories?
I would say the most instrumental authors on the way I do stories. Boy, it's hard to say because the ones I read as a teenager did influence me quite a bit, but they had. I look back and I read them now and I'm like, wow, my style is very different from these authors. And if you look at my early works that are unpublished, they are heavily derivative of these authors' writing styles. Like if you compare the little excerpt of Sixth Incarnation of Pandora, which is one of my early books that I read, I guess it would be the Rhythm of War launch. I probably read that at something like that. And compare it to Robert Jordan, you're going to find that my prose feels like someone trying to do Robert Jordan's prose. And not quite succeeding. But nevertheless, the authors I read growing up that had a big impact on me were Jane Yolen, Melanie Ron, Anne McCaffrey, Robert Jordan, Barbara Hamley. Are some of the big ones, followed by a little bit later in my career, Guy Gavriel, who is an absolute genius and is not read nearly enough. Not that he's not read, but he should have Brandon Sanderson sales, and I don't think that he does. He is an absolute genius. Jane is the same way, Jane Yolen. And I'd have trouble picking between the two of them for who I think is the greatest living fantasy author now that we have lost Mr. Pratchett. But, I mean, George is obviously up there. George is a very good writer. But those are the two that I would point to. Like, reading Taigana and realizing how much you can do with epic fantasy in a single volume led directly to me writing Elantris and Warbreaker as single volumes, right? And I can point at Guy Gavriel Kay for that. For those who don't know, Guy Gavriel Kay was involved in some way in the creation of the Silmarillion, but he won't say how. And Christopher Tolkien never said how. So we don't know. I have had dinner with Mr. K, and he was gracious and amiable, but would not tell me. So that's a secret he will probably take to his grave. A lot of us think that he did for the Silmarillion what I did for the Wheel of Time. That there were things that needed to be written to bring it together that were not written, that were only in note form, and that he filled those gaps in. But who knows? Because he's not talking, and Christopher Tolkien never talked. But if you're going to read Guy Gavriel Kay, all of his 90s standalones are fantastic. They read like 90s fantasy. They're slower paced than you might want right now. His one from maybe 15 years ago, the one that's based off of Chinese mythology is also just beautiful. Heaven's in the title. Under Heaven, I want to say.
Under Heaven, it looks like.
Under Heaven, yeah. Is just amazing. Just so gorgeous. And so I would say he had an effect. I would say that Watchmen and Alan Moore had a pretty big effect on how I view particularly ephemera and including things in my books that are not strictly just the story. So there's that, but there you go. There's a list of the ones that have had an effect on me.
Shirt Gal says, has any character in a book you've written ended up surprising you? As in, have you gone in intending to write them one way, but their actions and character arc ended up being different?
Yes, this does happen. Mostly for me, because I am not as much a discovery writer as an outliner. One of several things happens. I start to get really interested in a character, and then I sidebar that character, and I'm like, I'll do something else with them later. Because if I let them go now, they will overtake the narrative, and that will present a problem structurally. Sometimes the answer is no, run with this. This is really good. Rebuild your structure. Because this is what's working. And even as an outline writer, you have to be willing to do that. And I do that more frequently than you would anticipate. Another way this happens is that you finish the book and something is broken, and you can expand a character's part in order to fix the brokenness. I often point to Adolin as this in the first Stormlight book, where he was not intended to be a main viewpoint protagonist, and there were problems that I talk about at length in other places, but basically I needed to take some of the conflict out of Dalinar because he was feeling like you had too many different conflicting conflicts, so to speak, and I needed to make them external to him. And so giving those fears to his son and making his son a viewpoint protagonist fixed that, and then Adolin then was a main character and has gotten much more time in the books than I had ever planned in the original outlines because of that. Because I wrote him into that first book, I'm like, this guy really works. I needed this, and I didn't know it when I built the outline, so now I'm going to revise the series to use this need. So he's one of the quintessential examples. Spook in Mistborn was one of the first examples. I'm like, I want to do more with this character. It would break the structure right now. I'll find a place for it. And then I found a place for it in book 3, right? And so I'm going to explore who he is there. I'm going to sidebar it and find the place for it. So there's 2 examples. I don't generally have the story getting away from me in the way that it often happens to discovery writers, both in the happy accident way and in the way that can kind of overturn a book if you're not experienced.
Stephasu says, how much of Roshar, its history and its magic system, did you have developed before even writing the first book? I've seen so many inconsistencies from other authors when developing worlds over multiple books, but I can't fault yours. How do you maintain consistency when writing?
Good questions. You will be able to fault me. The place, if you want to find them, is timeline stuff. It's very hard in book 1 when you're doing multiple flashbacks and indicating things in people's past when you actually write those things to get them all to line up. We've managed to do it, but it is like Tetris. Very complicated game of Tetris to make all the things that I need to have happen in people's past work with the time for them to get between these places. And that's one of the places where it's even if you plan, timeline stuff is real tough, particularly after you write the stories. And that's where it is. So for me, Stormlight is a different beast from most of my other books. There's this thing we jokingly call among my friends, because I think I got it from Dave, called world builder's disease, where an author spends so much time world building that they never actually sit down and write their book. And if you don't sit down and write, you won't actually learn what the needs of your book are. And so your world building generally wants to be done in service of the story, not be a good unto itself. Asterisk. The asterisk is if that's what is fun to you. If what's fun to you is, I want to just develop all this lore, well, do it, right? Like, that's what was fun to Tolkien, and it sure went well for him. But to be a working professional in today's medium, you generally want your world building to be in service of what you're trying to accomplish, your themes, your characters, and your narrative. You'll read a lot of books in the early post-Tolkien era, if you read those, where it's obvious people were in love with their lore as much as Tolkien was, but didn't know quite how to make it work on the page in the same way. And you just get these lore dumps that are mind-numbing. You're like, all right, I'm going to have to read for 10 pages now about this hill they're passing, because the author doesn't quite know how to put it into song the way that Tolkien did, that works in service of the narrative that he was doing. So generally, you want to ask yourself, all right, what are my themes for this book? How is the world building going to impact those themes? How is the world building going to help me tell my story, rather than the world building taking over the story and then making for boring lore dumps? And so usually you want to avoid world builder's disease. I say all that to tell you that I made an exception for Stormlight. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to take 6 months and I'm going to write the biggest book of lore and world building and things like that I have ever done. Because I know I want to write a 10-book series, and I wrote 300,000 to 400,000 words of that, which eventually became the wiki that we now use internally. Not the external wiki, the fan wiki, but an internal wiki that is maintained by Karen. And even a lot of that old lore stuff didn't end up as canon, but it's there in the back of my head, and I draw upon it and use it for building the canon. So this was an exception, and it only really worked because I quickly brought on a team to help me keep consistency. Karen and Peter are the unsung heroes of this. They are able to spot these inaccuracies before they get to print and help me work through them and find answers to them. But I've also brought on, you'll see in the newest book, I have a list of people I'm calling Arcanists, which are fans that I've been like, hey, this is getting so complicated. Can you look this part of the magic system over and tell me where the problems you think are? They're like beta readers, but specifically focused on world building and things like that. It is important to me. It is important to me because epic fantasy in particular is about the sense of wonder and the sense of exploration and the ability to believe that it's real while you're there is a big part of being able to enjoy the actual story. It's not that the lore is more important than the story, but the lore helps us go to a different place. And it helps us then with our suspension of disbelief, which makes the whole thing work. And so I want it to work. I don't want to be one of those people that there's an inconsistency and then says, you know, the old famous, though I love it, the old famous sketch that Bill Shatner did. You Need to Get a Life sketch from Saturday Night Live. Have you not seen
I don't
this?
know if I've seen that one.
Everyone else has seen it, but somehow you haven't. I won't go into length, but they're asking very detailed fan questions of William Shatner on a Saturday Night Live sketch.
It's sounding familiar.
And he finally just breaks and says, get a life. It's not real. Well, yeah, we all get that it's not real. It's a joke because, you know, this is our community. We get it. We laugh. We get that it's not real. Yes, of course it's not real. But the reality of it while we're reading it is important to us believing the characters are real so that we empathize with them. And then that empathy helps us in our own journeys in life. That's what it's about. And if the lore is just super messy, that becomes harder. And I don't want that to be the problem. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Man, Benjamin, I'm sorry. You know, if I were doing these AMAs myself, I could only blame myself if I was typing these. But once you get me talking, then somebody else has to do all the typing. Yeah. It's way easier. I can sign these pages and just go on forever and ever and ever about random stuff. And so, this AMA may be full of the most long-winded answers to questions that any AMA has ever had.
It's like, ask me anything, I will answer 5.
Yeah.
HGHETDOA CSSV.
Ooh.
IMS, CSS Vimes. Okay. Ooh. As someone with a degree credit in acoustics, I was incredibly impressed with the accuracy of the pseudoscience magic in Rhythm of War. My question would be, what is the oddest, most interesting thing you found yourself researching for a book?
Oh man, I can go to the ones that, by the way, thank you. First, I'll say that. I had some help on that. That took some work to get right. But it is something that I wanted to get right. The weirdest, I can go to like, you are always researching as an author how to kill people, what it sounds like when people die, what stab wounds feel like, and what bullet wounds feel like, and how long it takes to suffocate someone. And all of these sorts of things that make our search histories look very suspect. Even if you're not writing horror and stuff like that, like you need to know, all right, what happens if a person falls this far? What happens to them? How long do they live? How long do you live if you get stabbed here? How long do I have? And so there's all of that stuff. There's all sorts of things along those lines. Those are the fun ones. I didn't think when I started my career that I would spend as much time as I do trying to find primary sources on what it's like to live with as certain human beings, whether it's dealing with certain mental illnesses or being part of a certain subgroup, or a cross between two subgroups that is very unique to a person, and being able to try to understand to get that right. That's where, like the other question asked about research, where I spend much more of my time is, all right, what is it actually like? What do people describe it to be like? To live as someone who has dissociative identity disorder, right? What do people get wrong when an outsider like me tries to write about somebody who has dissociative identity disorder? And that's like, the big splashy one, but there's lots of things like that that are much smaller. Smaller is the wrong term. It's not like they're issues, but paid less attention to, that I also want to get right. And read a lot about what it's like to be, what it's like to have ADHD, right? Can I get writing someone with ADHD right? Stuff like that.
Geek Who says, which book series have you written that you were most nervous to publish?
Oh, definitely The Wheel of Time.
Geez, yeah. Probably not even close.
They're not even close. Like, Wheel of Time, 100%. Like, ooh, someone's food is here. It's probably ours come way too early. Because that's even earlier than they said they were going to deliver it. Their latest delivery for the food was only halfway through.
Let's just call it. Our food's here. They won't mind.
No, we could turn this into a what? Mukbang? Mukbang? Is that the right word? Mukbang? It is Korean, so I should be able to say it. It is YouTube eating streams where people stream themselves having dinner.
It would be much easier for me because I think you'd have to continue signing.
I'd have to continue signing, but they talk through it, right? It just mukbang, just mukbang. Okay. I wonder what the Korean on that is. I'll have to look it up. But yeah, I think it is a Korean term. We could turn this into a mukbang, but we're not going to, because I still have several hundred words of radiance to sign, and we had lots of comments and questions, and we're not going to get to them all, but we should get to as many as we can.
Yeah, not to most of them, unfortunately.
What was this question that you had asked me that has completely fled my head?
Most nervous to publish.
Most nervous to publish, yeah. Second after Wheel of Time, let's see. What is it? It's never been a series. It's always like an entry. Like,
was Elantris up there for you? Because it was
the
number
first one. Yeah, it probably was up there. It's hard to remember back those days, but I bet it was. It's been 20 years now.
Does that feel weird?
Yeah, it feels so weird. Like, it feels. This is not an answer to the question. I don't know if this will go in the transcription or not, but it feels very strange. It felt very strange to transition out of the plucky newcomer into the established pro. Mm-hmm. And it has felt equally strange to transition from established pro to best-selling author in the industry, right? And that's been an odd thing. Granted, sometimes Neil steals that from me. Well, really, I stole it from him like once or twice. It depends on if Neil has a book or not. We go neck and neck even when he has a book, but if he has a new book, he usually beats me. But last year it was Lee actually who beat us. Lee Bardugo with Shadow and Bone.
Yeah, that series.
We were number one in fantasy and science fiction for the year before, but then Lee Bardugo, who I can't fault because she is fantastic as a human being and her books are great. So, but anyway, it's been an odd transition, right? And I look back those 20 years and it's like, wow, it's been a long time and a weird long road. So it's hard to remember Elantris. I'm sure I was nervous. Mostly it's like, will this entry work? There are certain entries I know will work and others that are experimental and whatnot. Like, I would say that the secret projects, I'm going to be more nervous than normal for a couple of reasons. Number one, this is the result now of the biggest Kickstarter of all time. I did not go into this intending it to be the biggest Kickstarter of all time. And I wrote these 4 goofy little novels thinking, my fans will like these. Let's find a way to get them to them, right? And I should say 3 of them are goofy and 1 of them is the opposite of goofy. But 3 of them are, these are fairly lighthearted as stories I write go. I am hoping that people love them, but now it's like, what do you do when you've made the biggest Kickstarter of all time and suddenly everyone's like, this is the book? I mean, it's good, but, it's not the Way of Kings, right? It didn't start a big 10-book epic. Mm-hmm. I thought that's what, So there's a little bit of me being like, the expectations for these books when I was releasing them was, hey, these are Brandon's cool, interesting side projects. And now it's like, these are the things that many people know Brandon for more than anything else. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of odd. And so hopefully the reaction and response to the books will be good. But yeah.
And just a little clarification for the chat. They were wanting to know which Neil, I'm assuming Gaiman.
Gaiman. Stevenson is amazing. Mm-hmm. Don't get me wrong. And I should differentiate because there's 2 very famous prolific, and prolific and excellent writers. But Gaiman is the sales juggernaut, right? For years, it was George at the top, Neil under him, and then me and Pat kind of fighting it out for third. And depends on where you put Diana Gabaldon, because she sells a ton, but it's often shelved in romance.
Yeah.
So it's like these things all blend. Where do you put J.K. Rowling, right? J.K. Rowling or some of these. But if you kind of look at the adult science fiction fantasy market of things that are shelved in adult sci-fi fantasy, I would include people like Lee, who's writing epic fantasy, even though it's often shelved in YA. There was kind of that thing. And then Game of Thrones did its Game of Thrones thing. And it's been a while since George has had a book. And so I was able to overtake George and then briefly Neil Gaiman. But then Lee just stomped us both last year. So, have a great Netflix series come out. And it can lead to some awesome things with people discovering your work.
Yeah. Aviator Away 1 says, is there anything, secrets or otherwise, in the Cosmere that fans should have figured out by now but haven't figured out? If so, could you give us a tiny, mini, super small hint to nudge us in a certain direction for fun, of course?
Wow. Let me see. Again, it's that word should. I don't think there's any shoulds. I don't want to say anything because it's going to be huge spoilers, right? Like the things you haven't figured out are the things I am planning to do as pretty big reveals. And I would be willing to bet, if I had to lay down money right now for you on the table, anything that I would guess that you haven't figured out, some fans actually have. It's just not become the prevailing number one theory. And so it doesn't filter up to me, right? And I don't change things based on what the fan theories are. I actually like it when people figure that out because it means my foreshadowing's there. So I would be willing to bet anything I gave you a clue on right now, you would all be like, oh, we figured that out ages ago, Brandon. Yeah, yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and raffle on this one. These sorts of things are very hard for me because I don't know what the fans haven't figured out. I generally know what the pervading theories are. And the pervading theories, let me say, you guys tend to be really good at figuring out my twists and turns, right? Like there's a big twist in Rhythm of War. I had seen multiple people had figured that one out. I don't know if that one was the prevailing theory, but multiple people had figured that one out. That's a good thing. Now, if too many people who aren't going on the internet, if you're figuring out while you're reading it and way early and consistently, then these things that are treated as big twists aren't big twists, that can be a problem. But even still, madness lies in the direction of trying to outsmart the crowd. Because if you try to outsmart the crowd, what you're going to do is you're going to set yourself up. to really well foreshadowed and interesting twists that are really powerful for the characters and the narrative being thrown out the window just because, oh no, they figured me out. And the story is stronger if you accept that people are going to figure you out. And this has been my philosophy since the beginning, and I think it has served me very well. So there you go.
Johnny Thunder 3483 says, what are the most important non-writing specific things you've done, choices you've made, habits you follow, skills you've learned, etc., that you would consider vital to your success?
Okay. Reference the earlier question about survivorship bias first, okay? But I'll do my best. I think that a big secret to my success is the fact that I was writing in an era where I couldn't easily self-publish. This is not to say that other people won't have huge success by being in an era where they can self-publish. But for me, I was kind of gated in a way that forced me to learn to revise before I published. And it forced me to learn to be consistent as a writer as well. I often point and say, all right, what's the difference between me and some of my contemporaries? What the things, they obviously have things they do better and that have helped them. What has helped me? Well, one is I wrote 13 novels before I sold one. I learned my process. I learned what to do when I had writer's block. And I learned what to do about writer's block during the era where I was super hungry and needed to get published, or else I was going to have to, give up in large part on the dream of being a full-time writer. And because of that, I had this motivation to learn my process and learn what to do if it's not working or if a book isn't working and things like that. And writing that many novels, jumping to different worlds, training myself to always be thinking of a new magic system, always be ready to fix a broken book when it comes back from the beta readers and has big flaws. This is, I think, a big part of my success. I would say another big part of my success, the things I have control over, right? We can talk about all the luck of being in the right place at the right time. Actually, I'll talk about those next. Benjamin, you're going to have to transcribe a lot for this one. But the things I had control over. Number 2 was my beta reader methodology. This is, for those who don't know the terminology, I believe strongly in a large test audience in a way that the majority of my writer friends do not do. They will have a few early writers,
Did a dead pen get put in there?
I think that some of the dead pens might be, because that other one didn't last very long. Those are, they sometimes get in there, but they're supposed to be sent to fans. They usually do. I know fans get them. So maybe 1 or 2 got in there. Or it's not a dead pen. You can check it, and I just got a bad. Yeah. A lot of my contemporaries will get some alpha reads and things. But I get somewhere around 50 reads on a book, generally. I know what people are going to say. And most of these are reads. I would say half of them are by established beta readers and half of them are by people who have only done 1 or 2 or no beta reads, just to give me a clean look from eyes that are reading the book for the first time and just see how people are going to respond to the novel. And this is so that I can know if the things I'm trying to do land or not. And it is vital to my process that I know ahead of time how people will react to a book. And I can't think of something since the early days, like the example I gave in Mistborn 1 earlier, when I didn't have this process down, where I've been surprised by a reaction. Meaning, generally, if it's a reaction, it is one that I've gotten, and I have decided that I want to have. If it's a negative reaction, it's usually because another segment of the readership has a positive reaction, right? And books have this interesting push and pull where I voiced this by Hoyd in one of the Stormlight books. Being lukewarm is the worst. Strong writing usually evokes powerful emotions. Now, this isn't to say that if everybody hates your book, you're doing the right thing. No, what I'm saying is powerful, good writing usually is divisive among even the fan base. Not always. There are certain things they all generally like, but a lot of times if you're doing something right, people will all latch on to different characters and different types of storytelling. Some will really love the character interactions of a team dynamic, where others will really like you to dig in deep to the magic system and the lore, and have a character who's fascinated by that. Where others want action sequences, where others want romance, and different perspectives on what is funny, different perspectives on what works as romance. These are all things that, as an author that works the way I am juggling and saying, all right, some people are going to think this section is slow because this is the section where I'm going to jump into each member of Bridge 4's viewpoint and kind of just give you some backstory on them. It's not moving the plot along very much. But for some readers, this is their favorite part of the book. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be okay having some parts that are boring to some readers as long as it's the favorite part to other readers. Mm-hmm. And so, but this is not a science. This is an art. This is where the art comes into it, making those calls, making the call when a large number and only a few people love something, a large number dislike it. Do I tweak it? It's when a large number don't understand it, and a few get it. Do you tweak it? Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. But that whole thing, I think, is part of my success. Part two, what are the things that I had no control over? One of which is that I am an artist raised by an accountant, and I have like my dad's imagination and my mom's work ethic. My dad has good work ethic, so that's a different thing, but it's a different type of work. My dad's a people person. My dad's a creative type. He is always thinking, always dreaming, always doing something, learning some new skill. Becoming a baker or a chef or a jewelry artist or things like that. My mother is an accountant and got very, very good at accounting, and that is the thing that she is really good at and is very, what we would call left brain, though I don't think left brain, right brain really works, but I am the amalgamation of the two of them. I have a bunch of my father, and particularly his mother, who was kind of a very head in the clouds dreamer, but I was raised by both my parents, don't get me wrong, but my mother was the one who was kind of teaching me to work, and she basically taught me to take an artist's desire to dance through flowers and dream about things and apply an accountant's work ethic to it, and that turned me into a successful writer. I didn't have control over that in a lot of ways. I did not have a control over being called by Harriet McDougall and asked to finish The Wheel of Time, right? That have an influence on my career? You bet it did. I did write a blog post about how much I love... Excuse me. I did write a blog post about how much I loved Robert Jordan and his work after he passed away, and she did read that, but I didn't have control really over that situation. And so there are lots of things like that. One very big one that I did not have control over is the decision that the MCU made in popularizing the idea of a shared universe of characters and ideas that, of course, had existed in books and in comic books long before, but brought it to the pop culture, made people hungry for it. And I had 2 years before Iron Man started a shared universe of epic fantasy novels for my own psychology and reasons, just because it's the way I wanted to approach telling stories. And lo and behold, I do this, and 2 years later, the biggest media franchise of our time popularizes that same concept. And so no longer did I have to be this weird thing where I'm like, I'm doing this weird thing. I'd say, people be like, oh, it works kind of like the MCU. It's a lot of worlds that are crossing over. That's really cool. And people were hungry for it. I didn't have control over that. I got very lucky to be the person who was writing something like that already when it hit. And instead of chasing it, I had been a little bit ahead of what pop culture decided it wanted.
Affectionate Box 1625 says, will we ever see Marsh world hopping?
Raffo, but good question.
They have a follow-up saying, I'd love to see a book with Marsh and Rashar. Any chance of that happening? I'm assuming Raffo.
There is a chance, but I'll have to Raffo for now. South
Bend Newcomer says, hey, hi, Brandon. What are you reading currently?
So currently, I don't know if I am reading an arc of something I was sent by a very prestigious author. But I don't want to say, I'm reading this in case it hasn't been announced. Sometimes very prestigious authors don't announce those things. So.
What was the last thing you read?
What was the last thing I read? A student book. Well, no, what was the last thing I read? It was one of my students' books, I think.
Makes sense. You are doing those critiques right now.
Right.
So.
Well, that doesn't count. Like a full book was the last full book that I finished, that I read the whole thing of. And it was for a blurb, and I'm trying to remember who it was, and I blurbed it.
It wasn't McClellan, was it?
Oh, it was McClellan.
Shadow of Lightning?
It was Shadow of Lightning.
Which just came out.
Which just came out. It's fantastic. That's the last one that I finished.
Okay.
So there you go.
ID 3535 says, I'm going to go back. 3050 Feral Hog says, why do you write characters with different disabilities and mental illnesses, and how do you write them so well?
So the why is an interesting question. Both of them are interesting, but the why is because I didn't set out and say, this is going to be a theme of my career. What I noticed is every person that I knew had a certain mental psychology that you might, in certain circumstances, call a disability. And it depends on how you define this. I don't want to appropriate disability, right? But is insomnia a disability? My wife has depression. Obviously, there's a mental. It is made her life a lot harder. I would call depression an invisible disability, right? I don't know if that's the right terminology. I don't want to be offensive in saying that. But what I started to notice is everybody has things. Is being really anxious about social situations as an introvert a disability? Well, not by our traditional definition of it, but it certainly impacts a person's life. And I started to realize this idea that we're writing characters that, the one with the disability, they get to be their whole story, rather than realizing all of us have things that we are dealing with, and certainly some are in different leagues than others. And I don't want to make a false equivalency there, but the idea that we all as human beings have these challenges, and if they get presented in books, they are almost always that person's only thing. Mm-hmm. It has to be a book just about overcoming depression. And when I sat down to write Stormlight, I'm like, I want to write about real people. And the real people I know are all dealing with things like this. So it's not a matter of, I'm going to make mental health a theme. I'm going to make real characters as I perceive them right now a theme. And I'm going to say, let's write about Kaladin, who has depression, but his story is not the depression. His story is Bridge 4. The depression certainly impacts that a great deal, but that's not his story. He is a person with depression who is in an epic fantasy story. And kind of building on that theme and trying to deal with things that I felt were just realistic. And it was less me saying, I am going to try to make mental health a theme in my books, and more saying, I want to have realistic depictions of characters in ways I'm not seeing. This feels very realistic to me. I'm just going to go with that because it's the way that most of the people I know interact with the world.
ID 3535 says, after so much success, do you still ever feel insecure about your current projects or struggle with imposter syndrome? Or at this point, do you just know that you have the Midas touch?
So it's somewhere between those two. Imposter syndrome is something that I have not struggled with in any part of my career. This is partially due to the fact that and I tell this story a lot, so I apologize for those who have heard it. Before I got published, I kind of had this crisis where I'm like, what am I doing with my life? I've written 12 novels. I'm not selling any of them. No one wants to read these books. I am wasting my life. And there was a lot of societal pressure to believe that way. And I came out of that time of uncertainty on the other side saying, but I love doing this. I really love these books, even if they aren't good enough. I am a better person for having written them. The world, I have to believe, is a better place for me having written them. I shared them with my friends who like them. If it does nothing more than make their lives better, we all have a cool writing group, we get to share our writing, then the world is a better place. And I kind of realized I'm going to keep doing this. If I never sell a novel, I'm going to keep writing. I might not be able to do it on the level that I want, but I'm just going to keep doing it. And that changed something in me that gave me a confidence in my writing that is unrelated to public perception. That my love of the books I'm writing certainly is enhanced by the fact that people enjoy reading them, but is not directly tied to it. I would be doing, as proof, I did 13 before I got published. I would be doing this either way. And if I didn't end up having the skill and luck to become professional, I'd still be writing it. And if my career collapses, I'll still be writing the books. And that's the most important thing. And I was able to kind of emotionally and mentally seize hold of that. And it has been a buffer against bad reviews and against imposter syndrome my entire career. The beta reader process is also that. If a book is bad, I couldn't have made it better because I've done everything that I can in order to make it work. And if a book is not liked by a certain number of people, then the artistic thing that I tried deliberately didn't work, rather than me accidentally just failing at what I wanted to do. The times where I fail at what I want to do, I just don't release the books. That happened to Apocalypse Guard, right? And I can prove to myself that that's what I do, that the books I'm releasing are the ones I want to release, and the ones that don't work, I'm not releasing. And so the imposter syndrome just evaporates before that, because I am the person I want to be. These are the books I wanted to release. People might not like them. That's okay, right? People have lots of different tastes. I love Terry Pratchett, and there are tons of one-star reviews of Terry Pratchett. Indeed, I can release a book that I love that no one else loves, and after the fact, I might acknowledge that was a weak book. But it was the best book I could make. So therefore, why the imposter syndrome, right? It was the book I wanted to write. I wrote it the best I could. There it is. And so these things, this is not a problem for my personal mental health. That does not mean that it isn't a real thing that a lot of authors feel. It's just that my particular viewpoint on the world lends me to not having that particular problem that I have to deal with. Mine are in different areas.
Joseph Morgan Stan says, "Hey, Brandon, your lectures from BYU that are on YouTube have inspired me to go on this wonderful journey to becoming an author and also studying English literature at university. I want to say thank you for making these online and free. They are an incredible tool to any aspiring writer, and the information you share and go over in them has personally helped me immensely. Could you share some words of encouragement and any tips or recommendation for a student heading towards this career path?"
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you. It is a lonely thing to embark on, and I thought that any resources I could give to help you on that would not be wasted. So I appreciate that you have found them of use. I would reference the previous answer I just gave about imposter syndrome as part of this advice. Understanding and getting comfortable with the idea that you are writing the stories you want to write, the best you can write them at your current skill level. And being at peace with that idea will be super helpful. Understanding that there are excellent writers who do not make a living from their writing because the whims of the market and fate are such that you are embarking on a career that your best efforts can make it, can and sometimes not, in some cases, not be enough. That's frustrating and that sucks. And it's okay to acknowledge that's frustrating and it sucks. What it means is that you have to make sure that there is value to you in what you're doing beyond the career, fame, and money that hopefully will come your way, because it is possible. That's the other side of it, right? It is absolutely possible. It happens every day that people create media that people love and that are able to find their way into doing it for a living. Happens every day to new writers. And it absolutely can happen to you, and the chances are much better than the world would make you think. But you need to be ready for the idea that it might not happen to you, and be prepared for the idea that your value and intrinsic value of your work should not be related to it happening, should be related to your enjoyment and fulfillment in telling these stories, embarking on this path, bettering yourself, and learning to adopt a skill. And if you can get yourself there, it's going to be so much easier for you, both if you don't sell and if you do.
Captain Coos 21 says, will we be able to purchase the books from the Kickstarter in bookstores at some point post-release?
Yes. We have almost finalized negotiations with a U.S. and a U.K. publisher. We have finalized negotiations with multiple overseas in translation publishers. And I expect that in all parts of the world, you will be able to get English language copies very soon after. So if you really like to support your local bookstore rather than a Kickstarter, we will get the books into those bookstores for you. That's important to us too.
Yes. Stumpy of the Shire says, how does it feel to know that you've had such an impact on people's lives? I've gotten back into reading because of your work when a friend bugged me for about 2 years, back in 2014 and 15, to start this book he enjoyed called The Way of Kings. Since then, I've averaged around 70 books a year, including all your works, The Wheel of Time, and so many more.
Wow. That makes me feel awesome. It is one of the best compliments that you can give a writer. I was made a reader. I didn't fall out of it like you did, but I was made a reader by the excellent work of some fantastic authors such as Anne McCaffrey, right? And some of the others I've already mentioned. And I think it is the greatest honor possible to be placed, so to speak, on a podium next to those people who inspired me by inspiring other people.
L. Green Mario says, super important question. When is Kelsier coming back to Fortnite?
Oh, Green Mario. Is that from the comic? There's a famous comic where Luigi is feeling very distraught and talking to like their parents. And the mom, Mario's like, don't worry, Green Mario, we love you too. Or we love you even if others don't. Something like that. Anyway, it's pretty funny.
That is pretty funny.
And important question, Kelsier will return. I can't promise when, but Kelsier will return. It's very on theme and on brand.
The Senate 19 says, do you write with intentional themes or just tell a story as a story and let the themes arise naturally if there are any at all?
Well, Shiv, I would say that I almost exclusively write the books and let the themes develop. Once in a while, there's something that I feel like it would be very interesting to explore. But I find stories for me are explorations rather than explanations, meaning that I don't go into a book saying, I want to teach people X. I will occasionally go into a book saying, I want to explore X and see where I arrive and probably explore it from the eyes of multiple different characters. And that sort of thing will be upfront. Like, I knew that The Way of Kings was going to be partially about the nature of leadership and what it means to be a leader, what it means to to take that mantle upon you versus being handed that mantle. And that was just going to be a theme, because I knew who Dalinar and Kaladin and Shallan and Yasna and people were going to be, and Eshonai in particular, with these sorts of themes. And I just knew I was going to explore it from the eyes of a lot of different characters. So yeah, that one was up front. But it isn't like I said, I'm going to sit down and say, being a leader is like X, and I'm going to show you. And most of the time, as I am reading, as I'm writing the books, I am figuring out what themes are important to the characters and trying to bring those out and emphasize them more.
World Hoppers podcast says, you mentioned the Black Company in the Secret Project 4 stream.
Yes.
What did you think about the series, since in so many ways it is the anti-Brandon Sanderson, but at the same time is so influential for the genre, and what element from it would you say is something that inspires you in your writing?
I would say it is very anti-Brandon Sanderson. I like to read anti-Brandon Sanderson. That's one of the things that people mistake often about me, is because I like certain things. I found that there are certain things I love exploring when I'm writing, that they assume that that's exclusively what I like reading, which is not the case. I like seeing people do things well in fiction, regardless of what it is. And I am glad there are people who do things very differently from myself. I would say that the thing that I learned from Black Company is the thing that basically all of us learned, which is kind of like Black Company is a precursor to the Grimdark movement. And as I've said many times, Grimdark does some great things. Mm-hmm. There are certain things you can't do in storytelling without, like, the bits of heroism and kindness that exist in a Grimdark story, right? When Tyrion Lannister shows kindness to
what's her name?
Her too. Yeah,
okay.
Her. Oh, that's a good one. To Stark.
You're thinking Sansa?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Or I was actually thinking of the scene where he shows it to Kid that got thrown out a window.
Bran?
The Raven. Yeah.
Okay.
When he shows kindness to Bran, right? That moment of kindness pops out in such stark power because of the grim, dark world it is in, that there are certain things you can accomplish in that kind of storytelling that you can't in other mediums. There's certain philosophies that you can explore better. And I think that Glenn Cook was a precursor of a lot of this, right? Like, he and Michael Moorcock really showed, look, fantasy, because of Tolkien, is very heroic fantasy. The hero is, epic and heroic fantasy. You've got these kind of two poles. And even if you go back to Conan and John Carter and these things, they're very heroic. Even if they're brutal heroic. And showing a different side of fantasy was eye-opening to a lot of us and very useful in understanding the places the genre could go. There you go.
Wevolia Grace says, is there an author that you wish to write a novel or novella with? And what are some challenges to being a co-author?
Boy, the challenges are ones I'm still learning. And I think that I would not want to write with anyone else until I have learned better these challenges. Right now, I am doing most co-authorships that I'm writing with friends of mine that we can learn together, right? And it's working really well, but these are people that I have close relationships with. So because of that, we can change it into a work. And with many of them, like if you take Mary Robinette or Dan Wells, right? They're people with whom I have a working relationship in other fields, so I know I can work well in the writing field. I maintain that the collaboration that will never happen, that I would love to do, is my weird one. You've heard this one, right?
I probably have.
The weird one, which is that I take a set of characters in a fantasy world that I brainstorm with Pat Rothfuss, and we come up with a world together, and we put two groups of characters in competing positions, alternating chapters, trying to achieve contrasting goals. And then we write it to the ending, and we give it to George, and we say, you decide who wins and how, and we'll write it. And it is not Brandon Sanderson and Pat Rothfuss. It is Brandon Sanderson versus Pat Rothfuss with referee George Martin.
Yeah, I don't think I've heard that one before, and that would be amazing.
Yes, but the problem is I'm picking, people I know that I think would do a wonderful job, who also I could not in good conscience ever do because I cannot impact their current work in such a way. But just, imagine that. Though, I do have to say Joe Abercrombie would make just an amazing referee for that book. And so Joe would do as good a job as George would do. It's just George has been an editor for so long. And most people know him as a writer, but he is an amazing editor. I've had the pleasure to work with him as an editor, and he was very good. And so this is kind of more of an editor's job. And that's why I think of George. He's a very good editor. And so anyway, that will never happen, but the whole verses,
that's a fun concept for sure.
Right? And it probably would be too hard to even write, right? Because you have to write a chapter, send it to the other author and be like, here's what my character's doing. What are yours doing? Chapter comes back. I'm like, all right, I'm going to try to assassinate his character. Here's the chapter of me trying to assassinate your character. Does it work? And them writing back and being
very
like,
difficult. Yes.
Instead of assassinating them, my character's going to seduce yours. And here's how I think it's going to go. And you're like, drat, my character got seduced. What do I do now? I think it would be almost impossible to adjudicate as an author how to actually make this work. But it's one of those weird, goofy ideas I had in the back of my head. And I've had it for years. Pat's heard it, so he won't be surprised when he's like, Brandon's telling that stupid story again. But yeah.
Very nice name 16 says, with everything else you guys are doing next year, what is the plan for the Stormlight 4.5 novella?
Stormlight 4.5 novella is still on my list to do when I finish Stormlight 5. I think it needs to be written. I am excited by it. We will see what happens because Stormlight 5 is almost assuredly 2014 now. 2024 rather than 2014. Yeah, it's almost assuredly going back in time. We're going to send it through a portal, but it's almost assuredly 2024. And that's partially the Secret Projects, but not as much as you guys probably would assume. The main reason has been movie and television stuff. As Joffwu anticipated, and the first question, I still can't say anything, this is the year that Hollywood came calling. And came calling in a very big way, even before the Kickstarter. They saw that basically all of Hollywood was watching and saying that fantasy can work that is not Game of Thrones, The Witcher, and Shadow and Bone, and plenty of other excellent properties. I mean, Arcane is another fantastic example. They're like, people like these, and it can be done with if it's not George R. R. Martin. And every one of those studio execs has had someone say, well, get us one of these, or get us more of these. And every one of them went to BookScan, which is the ratings for how books sell. And every one of them sorted the BookScan and said, all right, what authors are there out there that have not had anything made? And far as I can tell, I am the best-selling. I'm definitely a best-selling science fiction fantasy writer who has never had an adaptation. I might be the best-selling author in the world who has never had an adaptation. That's hard for me to say because it's harder to penetrate different subgenres and figure out where their sales factors are. And, it depends on what you count as adaptation. But basically, they all arrived at the same name. And then the Kickstarter happened, and they were already calling, and then they started calling more. And so this is the year where I've had to take numerous meetings with all of the streaming services, right? And a large number of the various studios and producers and things. And that takes time. It just takes a lot of time to be on all those meetings. And we will bear fruit from this eventually. But I am being very careful. In fact, I when I did my call with Netflix, right, I announced, I led off by saying to them, I am both very fortunate and very unfortunate. Very unfortunate in that I've never actually had anything made. I've sold tons and tons of things, and nobody was able to get one off the ground. That's unfortunate because I'm an unproven quality in Hollywood, and I understand that. I am also very fortunate in that none of those things actually got made. So nothing bad got made, and all the rights have come back to me, basically. And here I'm sitting in a world where everyone wants fantasy, and I have my rights, and I can say yes or no. That puts me in a very good position also, then I don't need the money. Hollywood does not know what to do with people who don't need their money. It's very bizarre to them. So we get to be very discerning and picky with what we want to do. Adam has been at some of those meetings. So
I have.
Yeah.
And you guys will know when he can tell you.
Yep.
I'm not going to try. How many hours a day do you dedicate to writing? What is your process? Do you write on a PC or do you dictate?
I write on a PC, Microsoft Word. I generally do 2 writing sessions a day, one from 1 o'clock until 5 o'clock, though it's been 2 o'clock until 6 o'clock since the pandemic pushed all my kids' sleep schedules back and therefore made them go to bed later, which makes things... Anyway, my schedule's been a little off, but 1 to 5 is basically where I want to be. And then another session from 10 until 2. So I get up at noon, work out, do other things, get ready, start writing, write for 4 hours, then go take a shower, then go spend time with my family, and then 10 o'clock, theoretically, they're supposed to be in bed. None of the kids go to bed that time anymore, but theoretically, I can go back to work at 10 o'clock, right from 10 to 2, and then 2 to 4 is video game time, or reading time, or things like that. And so some of our Elden Ring content is me doing it at 2 a.m., giving it to Adam, and him posting it the next day, and things like that. Some of it's not, but a lot of it is that. And this works very well for me. 2 writing sessions is better than 1 long one, 2 short ones. In the kind of modern era of Brandon, where I'm doing a lot of these meetings and I'm running a company, the company is much larger than it used to be. Hello, everybody. And this requires time from me as the president of the company. And so that 1 to 4 or 1 to 5 writing session gets gobbled up a decent amount of the time. It's 2 days a week consistently, sometimes 3 or 4 days a week, gets gobbled up by meetings and phone calls and reading contracts and going and doing an officer stand-up meeting and all of that sort of stuff, which is what I did a lot today. And so because of that, the writing time has been less this year specifically than it ever has before, which is odd because over the pandemic, it was the most it had ever been. Mm-hmm. Hopefully we bear fruit from that, though, like we're saying. Hopefully we get some very good adaptations.
Yes. So we typically stop at about 8 o'clock.
Yes.
It's 7:54.
7:54,
Should we
okay.
do some rapid questions?
Okay, let's try some rapid fire questions.
We'll see if that works. Do you want to stop at 8 or do you want to go?
Let's.
You have been talking a lot. Yeah.
My voice is getting kind of worn out. So let's go ahead.
Okay, so Faku B20 says, just wanted to say thanks for the Cosmere and especially for the Stormlight archives. Dalinar and Kaladin changed my life.
Oh, awesome.
So no question. The dude that does, do the estimated 2,000 book signatures you're doing the live stream count towards your daily words written quota?
No, it does not. Besides, my signature's only a B and an S. Read into that however you want. So it's not even a full word.
Starman of At Mora says, "Hey Brandon, after reading Mistborn, Elantris, and Warbreaker, I couldn't help but notice some recurring themes. What is it that entices you so much about the concept of living gods?"
So this is actually, it's backing up a second. The idea of the Cosmere, the fundamental idea of the Cosmere was power of deity put in the hands of ordinary people. That is the shattering of Elysium. That is the origin of the shards. And so when I built the Cosmere, that became one of the key themes of the Cosmere. And so to tie all of these different books together that are happening on different planets with different themes and characters and plots, I wanted some few things to link together. And that big linking connective tissue is, what do people do when they have the power of a god? Or even just a little fraction of it, right? What do they do with it? What happens? How do we explore that? And that theme is a connective tissue binding the Cosmere together, which is why you see me coming back to it time and time again. So it's more of a chicken and the egg thing.
Perfect Storm 479 says, "How do you stay focused and motivated working on such enormous projects?"
It is all about slicing the project up into smaller and smaller pieces and working on what you can at the moment. Lots of training and practice will help you to be able to do this. So slicing it up, then putting it back together. And once it's put back together, it's easier to manipulate once you have something, even if the thing is wrong or broken in some way. In most cases, much easier to work with. Now, fixing things is hard, but working with it, seeing it as a whole is easier when you've done that, when you've put those pieces together. And so learn to break things apart and then put them back together.
Coyote Redhand says, "What strategies, processes do you use to handle writing multiple projects at the same time? How do you keep stories separated in your head without recreating the same story type or trope?"
Good question. So one is to be aware of the things that you're doing too much and trying to actively avoid them. Another is good outlines to help. And the third for me is individually, I try not to be working on two projects that are doing the same thing. So while I'm revising one project, I can be writing prose on another. It's much more difficult to write prose on two projects at once. If I do, they need to be very different from one another in tone or voice. One of the reasons why you consistently see my YA projects be in first person and not third person omniscient is this helps me differentiate between projects and helps me get back into the theme of or the feeling of writing those characters and that story by putting that just stylistic boundary between them.
Marv Chuck says, "If you weren't a writer, what would you do?"
I would probably have ended up as an English professor. I do like teaching.
They also say, "I have to say you're my favorite author, and I really love your dedication and work ethic." Plus other things, but I'm trying to move on. Light is Green Go says, "Hi, Mr. Sanderson. I can't say I'm a fan necessarily, as I have never read your work, but I'd like to become one. As the author, where do you think is the best place to start with your work?"
All right, I'm going to give you a few options. It really depends on what you as a reader prefer. If you want something shorter and that has won awards, The Emperor's Soul is a good place. It does the things that I want to do, but it is more concerned with the idea of art than it is with the plot. If, on the other hand, you want something that just does a little bit of everything I do, Mistborn is a great place. Sometimes it's called The Final Empire. It is a self-contained novel that was one of my earlier books, but it also just kind of does everything I do, a little bit of everything. And it is more action and adventure-oriented. If you want to jump into the deep end first, and you are comfortable with large epics, then Way of Kings is what I consider my strongest work. It is the one you have to trust me on. It is the one where people read it and like by chapter 5 or 6, they're like, I don't know. And then by chapter 20 or 25, they're like, this is the best thing ever. And that kind of depends on, the reason for that is that I'm building up so many things. And it takes by necessity time to get that going. So I often say people should start with Mistborn or Emperor's Soul because of that. That inertia is harder to build if you don't trust me. But those are 3 options. I suppose I should mention Skyward. Skyward is my current YA series. If you want something that's a single viewpoint and is a little bit lighter, then Skyward is a good choice.
And it's 8 o'clock. Did you want to call it or do one more?
Let's go ahead and do one more.
Okay. This one is from Pillmakin, and maybe we'll need Jeremy to jump in on this one too, because they say, a bit of an obscure question, but in my country, Chile, rural folks use the word gancho in exactly the same way the Lopen uses it.
Really?
Did you know about it and put it into Stormlight, or was it a coincidence?
It's an absolute coincidence.
Jeremy, did you?
I thought you researched it out. I thought for sure it had some weird connection to.
Man, I had this is like when I found out that that Elland and Stroff. Yeah. I built them using morphemes out of Germanic, not knowing that they were actually words in German, or close to words. No, I just built it out of the morphemes that I was looking for in Spanish, and because Herdazians, I'm using Spanish as a particularly South American Hispanic culture as kind of an origin, a little bit of Mexican in there and things like that as well, to build them. And I just built the words using the sound morphemes, not even the meaning morphemes. And I guess I did a good job.
Crushed it.
All right.
Yeah, so I think that's about it. I don't think you're planning on visiting the thread anymore tonight. Correct?
Yeah, it's possible that I'll jump in.
Okay.
I don't know if I'll get more answers, though.
Okay.
Once upon a time, I could get the majority of questions answered. But that took hours and hours and hours. These days, as you guys can tell, I have to make sure that I get Stormlight 5 written. I have to make sure that the secret projects are revised. And with the movie and television show stuff gobbling up enough of my time, the ability that I have to go in and just and do these, unfortunately, is much harder. So if your question didn't get answered, you can put this at the bottom. Transcriptionist, you can give it to us and we can add it, edit, here, we're done. If your question didn't get answered, we do monthly live streams. And we get a lot of those questions from Reddit threads that we post. And so you will see on my own subreddits and things like that we will post and ask for questions, and you can ask me there and then, and I will try to get to them. It's going to be very difficult to get more than I've done right now in this AMA, and I apologize for that.
Yeah, and there's 1,500 comments.
Yeah.
I mean, you would spend a week
Yeah.
answering these, so it's just, yeah.
So anyway, thank you all very much. I appreciate the questions. I appreciate you, and I will see you next time.